So, do you like the background on my PowerPoint slides? I'm pretty proud of it, though. It's kind of silly and even misleading for this class, but I couldn't resist, especially because we're talking about terms like which, right? You ran across a lot of vocabulary in this week's reading, and it's confusing. And I admit that. I'm going to try to help clarify it a bit, but it's never going to be crystal clear because one of the things is that these terms are used by different people to mean different things. And so there's no one true definition for a lot of these words. Um, we've got words like witch and warlock, wizard, sorcerer, magician, witch doctor. All of that came up in the reading. And I know that you've had some issues working out what each one of them means. Witch is the most common term it's in the class title, right? And you've certainly heard the term before. The term witch, the way that we mostly remember it or understand it, is strongly influenced by pop culture, right? Someone, usually female, with magical powers, different from ordinary humans, right? A supernatural being almost. Can be evil, like in The Wizard of Oz, but more often it's good these days. Witches are experiencing something of a renaissance in modern popular culture. But that's probably the first image that jumps to mind when you hear the word witch, is some sort of movie or television show, maybe a book, definition or type of witch. Another familiar use of the term witch comes from history, right? The Salem witch trials, this idea of, once again, usually a woman, though in historical reality, witches could be male or female. But someone who is accused of being aligned with the devil, who works against his or her community, makes people sick or makes cows go dry, and is persecuted for it, oftentimes killed. We're going to talk much more about the witch trials, both in Europe and in the United States, later in the class. So if that's something you're particularly interested in, it's coming. A third term, or a third use of the term witch, indicates someone who follows the religion of Wicca, which is a type of modern paganism. So if someone ever asks you, well, do you believe in witches? You may have one living down the street from you. You don't know. Wiccan beliefs vary, but they usually include belief in multiple gods, both male and female. Sometimes there's the goddess is preeminent. Sometimes there is a balance between the male and female uh, figures, deities. Often Wicca includes nature worship. One of the core beliefs of modern witches is the rule of three, in that anything that you do to affect the world will come back threefold upon you. So if you work for evil, more evil will come back upon you. And this is this idea of magic, of reciprocity in magic, or balance in magic. And then Wicca is also a very sort of individualistic religion, in that one of the mottos is "and it harm none, do as you will," right? As long as you don't hurt anyone, you can do whatever you want. And oftentimes modern neo-pagan witches, will draw a connection between themselves and historical witches. Some even claim to be reviving an ancient pre-Christian religion. There's not a whole lot of evidence to that, but it's certainly a tenet in some witches' religious beliefs. So we also have warlock. As your book points out, the term warlock is not very useful. It's especially in the study of witchcraft, that is. It's mostly used in popular culture as far as I can find. Lots in role-playing games, curiously. Also, the Grateful Dead, their band name before they were the Grateful Dead was the Warlocks, for some reason. When it is used, it's often used to indicate the male counterpart to the idea of the historic witch, of the demonic witch, right? So a warlock is the male version of someone who works for evil and is often portrayed as aligned with the Christian devil. Then there's wizard, also very popular in popular culture. Often used to be the male equivalent of the first kind of witch that I discussed, this sort of wise man in this case, right, instead of a wise woman, who's versed in magic, someone who is different from and apart from ordinary humans. But wizard is also associated with the concept of high magic, which I'm going to talk about next, something that came up in our reading this week. So your book makes a distinction between sorcery and magic. And I have to confess that I'm not really down with this distinction. In the author's words, and I'm quoting here, in English, magic is often implied a sophisticated intellectual system as opposed to the crude practices of sorcery. All right, let's unpack those words, right? This is contrasting some sort of intellectual, sophisticated system, and saying it's not what, that it's not everybody has a sophisticated intellectual system, right? Some people practice mere sorcery. And there is, unfortunately, a really strong sort of ethnocentric, racist imagery or idea in this distinction, because magic is sort of portrayed by and in this particular sort of high magic tradition, the term magic or magician is represented by the tarot card, right? The magician. He's this white, sort of priest-like figure who is almost like science. It's almost like a magical type of science. He's investigating, and it is usually a he, by the way. He is investigating the sort of fundamentals of the universe. And in contrast, sorcery is described as the magical traditions of non-white European males. And it's often sort of presented as almost, well, this is the witch doctor terminology, right? It's a folk magic. It's crude. It's simple. It's just done to satisfy basic needs, right? Instead of this sort of elevated investigation of the universe. Sorcery in the book's terms, are love potions and curses, spells to bring wealth, right? Just like fulfilling needs as opposed to intellectual exploration. I don't like this distinction at all. You may come across two terms, sort of highfalutin vocabulary terms. One is thaumaturgy, which is low magic, practical. These are the love potions, the curses, the healing, as opposed to theurgy, which is high magic, the philosophical, religious, intellectual. So guess who's defining these terms? Guess who's characterizing one type of magical belief and practice as sophisticated and the other as crude? Well, obviously, it's the folks who are doing the sophisticated intellectual type of magic who characterize their own practices as noble, and the other as just folk magic, as just simple folk casting spells to make sure that they have lots of cows next spring or something like that. I don't want to pass judgment, or I don't want to place value. I don't want to weigh one magical tradition as opposed to another, and I don't want you to do that either. That's not our job as anthropologists. What we want to do is understand why people do the things they do, why they believe the way they believe, they practice what they practice. So don't put too great of a stock in how the book is defining these terms, and don't try to fret over the distinctions, because there really isn't one from the anthropological point of view. We want to know why people believe and practice magic, whether it's European magic of the philosophers of the 16th century, or it's your grandmother's charms in getting rid of warts, or whatever it is. We're going to look at them and treat them all as sophisticated and worthy of study, because they are. Now, there's one other term that I want to talk about, and that is science. As I mentioned, this tradition of high magic in European sort of intellectual history is kind of aligned with science, or kind of compared with science. It is compared with science in the book. But I want to make a distinction here between magic and science, in that science demands proof, right? Objective proof. The scientific method depends on the idea of objectivity, that phenomenon that is being studied can be observed by anyone with the means to do so, and that observation will be the same for every person, and that the connections between phenomenon can be observed in this way. But magic is subjective. It's not objective. In the Anthropology of Magic, the reading that you did, the author talks about her own experience, which happens in her head. It's not subject to verification. It's not subject to replication by someone else. So it can't be verified in the realm of science. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It means it's different from science. And we have to study magic in a different way. It may or may not happen. Sorry, that's my phone going off if you can hear it. But our job is not to evaluate the truth or untruth of a magical experience. It's to understand why the people who are experiencing it do so. In magic, unlike in science, the assumption is everything is connected. The connections may not be observable directly, Here's the Scarlet Witch, holding things in the air, and we have no understanding of how they're being held up, right? It's magic. Um, so you can't observe the connection between her hand or her, I guess her hand and the blocks in this GIF, but you can see the results of those connections and even manipulate them. And that's in the end our definition of magic in this class. It's that it's a worldview in which everything is connected, and it is possible to um, manipulate those connections to make a doll which has a connection to a human being, even though those connections can't be verified through science. I hope this helps a little bit. Make sure to use the discussion board and ask any questions if you're still confused. But for the most part, be comfortable with being confused. It's not so much that you have to understand what the definition of magic or sorcerer is. It's that you have to understand that these words are used in different ways, and that you should come up with your own uh, uh, understanding of the terms and be comfortable with that understanding.